Hi, welcome to the Controllers Council Annual Strategic Planning Best Practices Webcast and Panel Discussion. I'm Lindy Antonelli, partner with Armanino and Controllers Council Board Chair. Let's take a look at our agenda for today's webcast. First, I'll introduce our panelists, then quickly share some background about our sponsors. Next, we'll get right into our panel discussion. Speaking of questions, we'll have a Q&A. So please, in the GoToWebinar control panel, there's a chat and you can feel free to ask questions. Starting now, you can start populating the chat if you'd like to. And finally, we'll wrap up with some information about the Controllers Council, including some save the date. So before we get started, I just wanted to let you know that tomorrow, all attendees will receive an email with a link to this webcast archive. And again, don't forget to use the control panel for questions. And a surprise, webcast attendees can receive a special discount for Controllers Council membership. The code will be announced later. Now, I'm happy to introduce our panelists. Ted Whitefield, SVP of Finance and Operations at G2. Mike Whitmire, founder and CEO of Flowcast. And Jim Terlevin, CEO of Via Strategy Group. Okay, now I'd like to share some information about our sponsors. They make this special webcast and other programs possible. They include Bill.com, fully digitized AP and AR, no in-person approvals, and no paper needed. Flowcast, this is Mike Whitmire's company, financial close management software, and the controller's best friend. And last but not least, Armanino, top 25 accounting and technology consulting firm and strategic business partner to the accounting and finance organization. Now I'd like to turn it over to our panelists. So you can see us all today on video. I'll start with Ted Whitefield. Ted, you've been a CEO and controller for multiple and very exciting corporations. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your background?
Yeah, so I've had the great pleasure and a lot of luck to be in a string of successive growth stage, exciting tech companies, starting with Big Machines back in 2008, which had a wonderful exit to Oracle in 2013, and then got to move on to Steelbrick as their controller. And that company in 24 months went from 5 employees and 1 million in revenue to 200 employees, 20 million in ARR. We acquired a company and sold to Salesforce for just shy of $400 million. And now I'm at G2, which is the place to go if you're going to be making software decisions. You know, we started G2 because we found that it was a whole lot easier to find out where the good place to go for a $100 meal is, but very, very little ideas where you could go to help inform a $100,000 software purchase. So if you're in the market for software, please go check out g2.com. And that has also been a great ride. We took it from nothing to north of 50 million in ARR in a very brief time. So I'd like to big shout out to Mike Whitmire. When I was a controller over at Steelbrick, I was an early adopter of Flowcast, and it did make my job as a controller a whole lot easier.
Appreciate that, Ted.
Absolutely.
Great. Thanks, Ted. And Mike, you are a true accounting entrepreneur. You founded Flowcast, a pre-IPO startup, but you've also worked both in corporate and public accounting. So why don't you share some of your history with our attendees today?
Yeah, then thank you for having me. Really appreciate it. So as mentioned, Mike Whitmire, co-founder, CEO of Flowcast. I am now proudly an inactive CPA. So I started my career at Ernst & Young, Los Angeles. I audited there for just under 4 years and was in the entertainment field, mostly focused on kind of mid-market production companies. And great experience, but you know, had enough of that after 4 years, decided to move over into industry. Got really lucky and landed at a pre-IPO SaaS company in LA. Very few of them, you know, exist here, by the name of Cornerstone On Demand. So I joined there in 2009, was the 5th person in accounting, and ended up being there for just under 4 years as well. And we had a really successful IPO. We scaled the team from 5 up to about 50 or 60 by the time I left. And I was just a senior accountant, so I was in the trenches doing a lot of this work, and specifically I was the revenue guy doing deferred revenue journal entries using NetSuite, all that good stuff. And yeah, and as you know, in deferred revenue, a lot of other people can impact your work across the organization when booking journal entries and whatnot. So I had enough challenges around balances changing and then status update meetings with my controller. It was just not an efficient use of time. And so finally had that thought of, hey, why isn't there a management tool for the close? This is a very important and complicated process, and decided to leave Cornerstone to start working on Flowcast. So that was 2013. Yeah, fast forward to today. Ted, one of our very early adopters, appreciate him taking that risk and providing feedback on the product and helping us build it out. Fast forward to today, we have close to 200 employees. We just crossed 1,000 customers, mostly within the mid-market using Flowcast. Yeah, 93 million in VC funding raised. Been a really fun ride, and yeah, hoping for it to continue.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining, Mike. And Jim, you're a serial CEO and now interim CEO and C-suite exec. Why don't you tell us some interesting aspects about your long and storied career?
With the emphasis on long, right, Lindy? So many years ago, I started life as an engineer designing computers, which are now mostly in museums, but then embarked on a 35-year career of doing turnarounds of technology companies, generally in enterprise software. And for a long time would go in as the CEO. Those companies ranged in size from pretty early stage to almost 500 million in revenue. And I'll talk more about that company when we get into the questions in a minute. And some were public and some were private. So very different financial reporting requirements for both of those, all of those. They were all, there were about 6 of them. They were all successfully turned around one degree or another. And about 10 years ago, started doing that on an interim basis, so I could start my second career before it was too late. And I teach, and I still do that, interim role turnarounds. And I teach in the Graduate Business School at the University of Illinois, and one of the courses I teach is strategic planning. So we'll see how that goes now. It's an interesting time.
It sure is. And you guys are going to just bring a wealth of information and advice to our attendees. I'm super excited for that. I do have one slide I wanted to share prior to our Q&A. So as recently as 2 weeks ago, we announced the results of our benchmark survey, our first annual Controllers Council benchmark survey. And the related to our session today, financial planning and analysis, FP&A, as it's always known, was identified not only as a primary responsibility today for both controllers and CFOs, but as a top priority for the future for both controllers and CFOs. So that's really pertinent. This topic is spot on where we are today in this world. And I would like to turn it over now to our Q&A session.